Welcome in, everyone. Thank you very much for coming on to today's show. We have a little bit of a special guest today, and that normally we have on students or those who have graduated somewhat recently. And this time we're reaching to the other side of the classroom, so to speak, with a professor, a Dr. Steve Kortenkamp. How are you?
Hello, Bryce. Good to see you again. I'm doing just fine.
Good. For those listening, Steve and I go intermittently back about 2017 area when I had first taken a planetary science gen ed class for my minor. If you watch the first episode, you know a little bit of how complicated my story is, but we fast forward a bit to 2024 to where I end up being a TA for Steve, and that's how we got the more recent interaction and know-how of each other.
Right. Yep.
And for those who don't know you, Dr. Kortenkamp, what kind of professor are you? What makes you you?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm known as a professor of practice, which is kind of more of a teaching track position. It's, I think, in theory, designed for people who have sort of been out in the real world for a while doing, real astronomy, so to speak, not in a university or educational setting. So I was out in that environment for about 15 years. I was working here in Tucson. There's a local planetary science research place. It's called the Planetary Science Institute. And so I
Huh.
was a professional astronomer working there on grant funding from various places and stumbled upon an opportunity to teach a class here when the university's Osiris Rex mission was just, uh, you know, getting off the ground, so to speak, not being launched, but when they were actually proposing for it and in the
I
early
see.
development stages, some of the people proposing that got funding to develop the plan. And so they used it to what we say buy out of their teaching. And so then there was a class that needed to be taught and there was no one to teach it. So they reached out to me and I said, "Oh, that sounds like a fun idea. I'd like to try it." So I tried it. I liked it. I think the class liked it, and so that was kind of a temporary thing. Just come in as in a visiting position for a semester and teach a class, and then go back to my normal job. And then I ended up doing that for a few falls in a row. So fall of I think the first time I ever did it was 2007.
Hmm.
And that also gives you a little sense of the timeline for these missions, right? That was very early planning stages for the OSIRIS-REx mission, which didn't launch until 2016. So and that was
That's wild.
basically it was all on paper at that point. I hadn't even started building anything yet. So I started doing it in that way, and that carried on until 2017 when I was offered a chance to come over here to the university full time and become this professor of practice. So leave my real world job behind and come over to the education side. And so I took that opportunity. It's a little bit more stable. You don't have to write proposals for your funding all the time and a different kind of a job description. So I did that right around the time that you and I met when you took that class from me. That was basically the beginning of that experience for me full time here at the university. And at that time, my research also changed. So originally it was planet formation, computer simulations of the orbits of asteroids and comets and how they impact each other and planets. And it transitioned at that point into more science education research. And so we
Hmm.
started developing tools and techniques and curriculum for teaching astronomy to students who are blind or visually impaired. Combining data from spacecraft with 3D printing, we were able to build tactile models. So people who couldn't see the moon, like what's the moon like? They could feel what the moon is like on a small scale. Like the Minions movie where we shrunk the moon down to something you could hold in your hand and you could feel the impact craters on it. And so that really also was a change for me from sort of pure research into it was all theory about planet formation into some more literally hands-on science education kind of research. And I've been doing that ever since. So about 10 years,
And
a
just
little
to
bit
make
less.
sure I don't forget to cover these things at all, we're talking about the tactile models and such. Some of you listening might kind of hear me
Yeah.
clanking around with these things. But when I had been a TA for Steve, he gave these little 3D printed models of sorts for different celestial bodies, including like the moon, Mars, and even got one of like meteor crater on Earth. And it's really cool to, even though I can see, I can look at pictures online, be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what that crater looks like, or this little valley, canyon, whatever. It's a different experience to, you have an idea in your head of like, okay, I might know whether that's going to be smooth or maybe it's rough. Is it going to be like bumpy rough or is it going to be sharp? Would it maybe cut me if I was a giant on Mars sort of thing? And it's cool
Sure.
to be able to experience this other like facet or another way to just experience these things out in space.
Yeah, and I mean, it's pretty fun to introduce these resources to not only to students who can't see, but to other tactile learners, so to speak. So like people who really learn better by holding on to things and exploring them themselves rather than an image on a screen, or even just a printed out image of something. So usually what I see is with little kids, it's almost like a toy, and also much older adults who maybe haven't been in a classroom for a long time. And you put a model of the moon in their hands, like especially the far side of the moon that none of us can see, through a telescope, and you say, okay, here's what it is. So that's kind of neat to see that the reaction from
I kind of
people.
wonder again.
Yeah, right, right.
And so, what was it specifically talking in the vein of like media for visually impaired? What got you started into doing that? Did you stumble into it? Did you have like family or a friend that was of that delineation?
So that was also a bit of an evolution. And it goes back to that very first time I had a chance to teach at the university. This was in 2007, right? The first day of the first class in a room with 160 people enrolled in the class. And in the front row was a student who was blind. And planetary science is a very visual field, right? And so I had this really beautiful presentation plan for each day of the class, and he couldn't see any of it. He could hear me speak, and I had some audio built into it a little bit. I put more in after I met him, but his world ended a couple feet in front of his face. He wasn't totally blind, but after about 2 feet, nothing. And so he was able to use technology and enlarging a lot of the things to at least read on his screen, but he couldn't see anything that I was showing the rest of the class. And that had a big impact on me. But there was essentially nothing available for me to use to help him in that class. I mean, we could have printed the material in Braille. He used a screen reader, so he was able to get the actual text of the class, just not the images.
Hmm.
So it was a lot more verbally describing what's on the screen, as if almost like you're translating what everyone else could see so that he would at least have some understanding of that. So that kind of got in my head, at least the ball rolling about, gosh, I really need to have a little better handle on this kind of stuff. And that moved very slowly until around 2015 when I met a colleague in the College of Education here, Sungay Hong. He is 100% blind, and he runs the program for teaching teachers of the visually impaired. And so him and I teamed up to develop this program. He's always been interested in astronomy, even though he can't see. We put in a proposal to get some funding. The first time it was shot down, which is very common with
Oh,
research proposals. Second
yeah.
time, though, we got it. So we got the funding. We were able to buy 3D printers, hire students to help us with the project. And we built up this project over the course of several years. Now, I think so in that little box of models that I gave you, I think there might be like 14 individual models there.
Yeah, in
Um,
that area.
yeah, we're up to about 35, 40
Hmm.
tactile models of various kinds of planetary terrain, and always looking for more too. So, like the giant volcano on Mars, Olympus Mons, that's now in our collection. People can hold it, look at it, illuminate it with their phone lights, and see the shadows and how that changes. So, we've got a pretty big collection now. I think it's enough to do. We could build a whole class only based on these tactile models, just to
Hmm.
let's explore the solar system, at least the solid objects, solid surfaces in the solar system based on that. So that'd be a fun thing to do, in the future. Build a whole university class based on these models.
That would be a fun experience, especially because I know whether it's people listening or just in my own experience and other classmates, you kind of get more or less stuck in the common framework for classes of the lecture, listen, blah, blah, blah type. So to be able to have this more tactile, other type of learning thing, I'm sure a lot more people would be able to grasp it and enjoy what they're learning too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right. Right, it's a mostly sedentary experience, normal class, and so anything that we can do to sort of flip that around, I think, would be appreciated on both sides of the classroom, so to speak. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can I ask a little bit about like the making of these as far as like how do you turn like a picture of whatever crater into like actual depth and height and such?
Yeah, so the picture is actually what we call an elevation profile. So the spacecraft or the aircraft moves over the terrain and it uses a laser. It's called a laser altimeter, and it just shines the laser down, and a little tiny computer times how long it takes for the reflection to come back up. And based on the speed of light, it knows how far it's traveled. And
Hmm.
we know the height of the orbit above the mean surface of the object. And so we can tell what the terrain is doing. So we build up, like for the case of a planet, we have the full map of Mars or the moon or Mercury using this data. And now some asteroids too, the asteroid Bennu, we have this elevation profile of the full and complete object. And so then we go in there and we cut out a little piece, like, all right, like the piece of the moon that you showed was on the far side of the moon and it had Mendeleev crater in it. It was about 500 kilometers on edge, so we just carved out a little piece of this map. Yeah, that's it. The big one there is Mendeleev, the father of the periodic table, the Russian chemist. Well, the Russians got to name everything on the far side because they were the first to see it. So we carve out that little piece and it's data. So it'll tell us what's the elevation of every single pixel on that frame. And then we transform that into a 3D printable elevation profile. It's called an STL file, which is a format that 3D printers can understand and can print. And they will then print from the bottom up, that profile of the surface of that object. So we do that for each of these 40 some models now. We get a little 3D printed model. Okay. And most of them, all right, just show you like the full size ones we use with our students are about 15 centimeters on an edge. So there's Meteor Crater, which is actually behind me on my.
You get to see it twice.
Yeah, so we print one prototype like that, and it's once you have the printer and you have the data, it's really cheap. That's about $3 worth of plastic to make
Oh.
that. And then we make a mold of it. So we take liquid silicone rubber, making it kind of like an epoxy where you mix part A and part B together. You mix them all up, and then you've got about 10 minutes before it starts to solidify. And we pour it over the top of that 3D printed model. And we come back the next day, and the silicone has cured. We peel it off, and then we have the inverse of that as a mold, and then we can fill it with anything we want to. I've done these with chocolate sometimes, 3D chocolate models of Meteor Crater. But we fill it with a urethane plastic that's also liquid initially when you mix the parts together, and then that cures. And then we peel out the cast. And so all of the ones that you have in your box there, those are little tiny casts made from molds of miniature models. And that process, let's see, before the really bad inflation of COVID, that was about $5, so $2 or $3 to make the 3D printed one, $5 to make a cast, but you get the cast in about 20 minutes and it's a perfect reproduction every single time. 3D printing, I don't know if you've ever done it or any of your listeners, but sometimes it's a crapshoot. It turns out perfect once, you print again and you get a bird's nest of crap. These casts, every single time you get a perfect cast. And it's very easy to, I wouldn't say mass produce, but produce many casts. Meteor Crater, I've made about 200 of those from the same mold. So
Oh,
it
wow.
just keeps on going. And that's how we do it. It's a little bit harder for the hemisphere models. Here is a hemisphere of the moon. It's a little dark in this image. This is the near side of the moon, and it's has an interior to it as well. So it's a shell. That's a little trickier because it's a two-part mold for the outside and the inside.
I see.
But so more labor intensive, but not much more in cost of materials. Anyway, that's the process. So it's pretty cool to do.
It's fun to think of having like this whole line of models and chocolate for like around Valentine's Day of like, oh, like my love for you is out of this world, and you got
Yeah,
all this
right.
space stuff.
Right.
Little side gig in case you need it.
Yeah, well, we entered that one in there was a holiday bake-off contest here in my department. Most people try to do it something to do with planetary themes, and so it was marzipan meteors because the interior, the outside was chocolate, but the interior was marzipan, and they all looked like Meteor Crater. So
Oh,
we
that's
won the
cool.
prize. Yeah,
How could you not? I mean, that's just
I
perfect. It's
know.
the
Yeah,
exact
right.
thing, and you can
Right.
eat it.
I don't know if it tasted very good, but it sure looked cool.
That's the judge's problem.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, before I go talking about more your own journey of becoming a professor of like your own education, there was one thing I caught in your little intro there of being in like a real world astronomy. Is it relatively common? Because I know a lot of my listeners for now have only really gotten astronomy students for the most part. And so they might think that astronomy is always tied to academics in some way, like athletics, or you're pretty much always with the university. Is astronomy the same way? Are you pretty much always under some university banner, or is it common for like how you were in the real world for people to do that as well?
Yeah, it's not very common. I think like if you were to look at how many astronomers are in the world, professional astronomers, it's 10,000 or so. It's not a huge number. And how many of those are actually like professors at a university versus more sort of like what I said, real world researchers? There's a lot more that are not, professors, tenure track professors, things like that. That's kind of an unusual kind of route, even though that's the most visible for those of us when we're students. But for instance, the Planetary Science Institute, here in Tucson, where I work, we have okay, we had because I'm not affiliated with them anymore, but there's a couple hundred planetary scientists working there, and most of them have PhDs, right? They went to grad school, they got PhDs. They write proposals to get funding for the work that they do from NASA or National Science Foundation or ESA. PSI is an international collection of people. Many of them work remotely, even though the headquarters is in Tucson. Maybe half of them actually work in Tucson. The other half are a spouse works somewhere, so they have to live in a different city, but they work remotely. So I think, it's different from the experience we all get when we are students out in the real world. There's a lot of people that's their job, 9 to 5, 2 weeks vacation a year kind of thing, and they're astronomers, right? They're doing that. So I mean, another misconception a little bit is about like astronomers and telescopes, right? So very few of us are observational astronomers using telescopes, even though that's the stereotypical tool of an
Hmm.
astronomer, right? So a lot of computer modeling of various things. So theoretical astronomy, um, that kind of thing. I think, right, the real world experience, any of these kinds of missions that are going on, if any of your people that are you're going to be talking with when you are an advisor or something, I really like, astronomy, but I don't want to be a professor. It's like that's probably good because so many jobs out there are not in, the university kind of track. Every single mission has, a few professional high level PhD astronomers, so to speak, and then hundreds of people working on the mission in all sorts of different ways. And some of them are artists that are involved. Some of them are social media experts, communications experts. Some of them are coders, right? They're writing the code for the data involved with the mission. And they want to be involved in astronomy and planetary science in their coding rather than doing like banking coding. And that's a way that they can do that. And it's not in any way, like an academic kind of track for that. So I think that's a really important distinction for, especially here at the university, so many astronomy majors and such a small number of them go on to graduate school, but they all, this is such a good place for astronomy. They all find jobs, and some of them go into, Wall Street and running numbers there. It pays much better. But a lot of them just find these jobs doing astronomical type work, which they love, and but not, not on the so-called tenure track or professor track or things like that.
I was gonna say that brings up another interesting thing that I think some might not keep in mind of being involved in astronomy can come in lots of different flavors where you talk about like the social media person and the coder. You don't necessarily have to go through the full-blown astrophysics PhD and then you're going to be the lead person and it's just a bunch of these astronomers together to make that project work. It can be done in a lot of different ways with various schooling, various types of schooling. Can you speak on if it's generally, are there much high school graduates that are able to break into that field, or do you kind of need some amount of college to get anywhere, for lack of words, in that kind of realm of projects and astronomy, planetary science?
So that depends on what part of it you're working on. So if it's like a mission, okay, that's hardware that's got to be built by somebody. right? And there's all kinds of levels in that side of it too, the engineering side of building these things. So some of these engineers are working on the theory of the detectors or the theory of the robotic arms, how to control those kinds of things. But there are other people who actually are doing the milling. These are mostly made out of aluminum, right? And so you have to mill the parts, right? You have to know how to control the computers that are running the CNC milling machine. And so I think at some level, it's the technical skills to do that kind of stuff are completely different from the science side, the background on the science side. And that's where I think you could find people that don't necessarily have that higher education background, but they've got more of the technical side of things. Now, there's a lot of, I'm sure, apprentice work that leads up to that point, right? Some place like Boeing that's building, one of the spacecraft parts or something, that you got to work your way up through them to get onto that team. But I think that, that is a possibility of those kinds of things too. Of course, I don't
Okay.
know much about the engineering side of things, but that's just spitballing here about, those kinds of opportunities.
No, that's good. That can help kind of even if it gives someone that little tiny spark of curiosity to go, maybe I should research into Boeing type apprenticeships, or, I want to get into planetary science and astronomy, but whether it's I know how I am in a classroom setting, like maybe I just can't sit still, maybe I just can't afford to do tuition for a while. I need to find something that gets me paid. It could be something that people can still get into that field. And now, if this is like their inspiration, like, oh, okay, I can go find that. That's great. Even if we can't
Yeah,
say exactly how that'll go down, knowing that the options there can be enough sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
And speaking of higher education or education at all, for your own track, how did we get to today as far as you being a professor and such? Have you loved astronomy since you were 5 years old and you saw the moon and such, or how did you kind of get into where you are now?
Yeah, okay. Well, this gets a little chaotic in my personal history of that, but so I was not a good student when I was younger, like middle school, high school kind of thing. I got a lot of D's, a lot of C's, and the only classes that I really enjoyed and did well in were my science classes, not even my math, right? The math was probably one of the worst ones that I did. And so it never really occurred to me to even go to college. It's like, okay, I was just kind of marching along and doing my thing. And my thing in high school was that I was a runner. And so that was my passion then. And but I also had to be a student. So I had to take all the classes. So, but I just enjoyed the science classes and I really enjoyed running and I was pretty good at it. And so when I came to graduating from high school and I had to think about what was next, I was a fast enough runner that I got recruited to run in college and not like, way high up Division 1 or anything. It was just a school in Wisconsin, Division 3 school. And the coach would call me up and talk to me about my running and encourage me to go there. And my grades were just good enough back then that I could get in. And so I graduated from high school and I went to college to run. And that that was about 2 years of that before I really started to realize that that couldn't last forever. I could run for you get 5 years to compete for 4 seasons, and then you pushed out the door
Bye
whether you graduate or
bye.
not. Yeah, and I wasn't fast enough to do anything after that to make a living, so to speak. So I started looking more at what I wanted to do later, and I was still enjoying my science classes. And for a lot of the science classes, you have to take math as well. And so I was still struggling in math, but I finally took a calculus class, and that was what changed for me, changed in my head, seeing how the math connected with the science. And so that was about 2 years into my college experience when the light bulb went off and I started making these kinds of connections. And then I started putting more effort into my studies and was still, running a lot as well. And then I graduated from college, and then you got to think about what you're going to do next. And I thought that I wanted to go to graduate school for engineering.
Okay.
And so I applied for that, and I got into a program at UC San Diego, so University of California, San Diego, for aerospace engineering. I got a full fellowship there to cover my tuition and my living and my expenses. And of all people that I got connected with there was someone in the astrophysics department named Sally Ride. I had expressed some interest in NASA in my cover letter. And Sally Ride was a professor at UC San Diego, not in engineering, but in astrophysics. And I don't know if this was well before your time, but Sally Ride was the first American woman in space. So she was a NASA astronaut. She retired just before the Challenger explosion and was a professor in San Diego. So in my conversations with her, another twist in my path was I realized I didn't want to be an engineer. And it was unfortunate because I was all set up. It was paid for, and I had a position, and I had this great advisor. But that's where I learned that that's not what I wanted to do, and so I dropped out of school at that point, or I flunked out, one or the other,
I was
whichever
gone.
take. You look at the old transcripts or something, but I dropped out and I went back to undergrad, and did a lot more computer science, and I got pretty good at coding, and then I realized that I wanted to do astronomy. This is after talking with Sally Ride for a while. And one of the inspirations for me, I went to a seminar about meteorites. This was in San Diego. And then the person speaking had a whole bunch of meteorites, and they put one in my hand, and they said, "You're holding a rock that's older than our planet." Right. Touch it with your finger. You're touching something that's more than 4.5 billion years old. That's when it became this rock, right? It's older than anything on the planet, except another meteorite that fell from space. And that sent kind of a chill down the back of your spine kind of thing. And I realized that, oh, that's pretty darn cool. Okay. So
Mhm.
then I decided I needed to change paths there, and eventually ended up in graduate school for astronomy. Um, and the 15 years out in the real world after that eventually led to me being in the position that I'm at now. So, but it was very, kind of all over the map. It was maybe driving a beer truck. That's what my dad thought I would do after high school, to just being fast enough to run for this Division 3 school that gave me something to do while I was studying. And then, and all of those steps I think was important along the way, because I could have just gone off and done, what a beer truck person does, and that's fine. People drink beer. Someone's got to do that. But I don't think it would have been very fulfilling for me compared to what I do now. So,
Can
yeah.
I ask if you kind of remember generally, like when it came to the time you're like speaking with Sally Ride and you've come to that realization of, well, I'm in this spot, this position that's paved out for me, but I don't want it. Was this a happy time? Was this a more or less devastating time? How did you feel and how did you kind of get through this transitionary area?
Yeah, I mean that was a very challenging time mentally, emotionally. And not only was I a couple thousand miles away from home, but it was, coming to that realization that what you're doing is not really what you want to do down the road. Um, yeah, that was, even looking back at it now, it was a miserable, very miserable time. But having gone through that, hopefully I can relate to people who are here at the university a couple years in, and they realize themselves, I'm in the wrong major, and that happens so often, but there's not a lot of talk about it. Like, I am in the wrong major. And sometimes it's people that are in my class and they go, "Hey, this is really fun. I'm going to try this out." Or sometimes it's the other way around. Some people who take my class are astronomy majors, and they're like, "Oh, is this all there is to it? Come on." And they'll switch too. And so realizing what goes through someone's head when they recognize it. Okay, I'm on the wrong track. And, maybe you don't have to drop out of school, but even just changing your major, that can be a very big deal for a lot of people. If you've been thinking about that for a few years, and then suddenly you realize it's not all I thought it was going to be. For me, it was like, man, more equations and solving, dynamics and statics problems. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I wanted to build things, and maybe I was just too impatient to get before I got to that point. But so anyway, I think, yeah, no matter where you are, that's can be a very challenging time. Yeah.
It's funny that you say being impatient because I'm kind of in that same boat or was when I decided to shift from going for like astronomy professor is why I'd come back to the U of A to now doing academic advising. It was one of those things where talking to enough professors, whether it's you and Prather, a few others like in Denver, I've reached out to just to get the general idea of like, hey, so you're gonna need to go get your full-blown PhD pretty much. Yes, a master's works, but if you want to be able to teach at more universities or have more options, you need the PhD. I'm like, Okay, cool. How long does that take? Well, you're going to need about 2 or 3 years to get your new undergrad. And then on average, let's call it 6 years for the PhD. And then after that, maybe you need to do a postdoc. Maybe you get to be a professor right away, but you're only whatever entry level associate, whatever they might call it,
Yeah.
14 different names.
Yep.
And might be doing some teaching, but you also got a lot of politics or working with grad students, or you got proposals to do and you got the research. And it was this whole stacking thing of like, it was like my time back at the planetarium. I just like telling everyday people the big yellow one's the sun. Like, I didn't need the really deep theoretical whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it's fun to have those conversations with the people who know stuff, but it's more entertaining and more exciting, in my opinion, to get people who don't know to, what do you mean that we can't see one side of the moon? Is it always like that? Has it been like that forever? Has anyone ever seen it? Stuff like that.
Right.
And still coming to that moment of when I decided professorship is not for me. It's you just have this whole like paradigm
Yeah.
shift in your head, and it doesn't feel comfortable at all if you just like
Right.
I because you feel so like you self-guilt in a way like I did this, like I chose to change. I came to this conclusion and I don't know what to do about it for now. And
Yep.
it does help a lot with talking to other people when they're going through this, that we can now say, yep, I literally have been there myself and I know how we can try and get through this. A lot of it's just kind of time, airing it out. Some people want to talk about it, some just need to think about it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's just something the person has to go through sometimes. Not everyone, but I think a lot may have to.
I mean, to some degree or another, I think almost everyone faces that kind of choice, if you will, about am I on the right path kind of thing. And it comes, I think, at different times in your life too. I've read about people who in their 50s, they kind of realize I want to go a different way. And sometimes it's dramatically different. Like, I want to be a doctor, like I mean like a real doctor, they go to med school then, it's like, wow, I have no patience for that right now.
That is the thing. Like for a lot of times when people are thinking about, oh, like I'm stuck, I can't change, I can't do anything. And it kind of comes down to, well, you're still alive, so you technically still have time, who knows how much. And the only real catch in some ways is money, whether you have family you need to support, and if you need to go to school, maybe you need to worry about doing school and work, and that's might be tough, or tuition's in the way, or maybe it's a downgrade. Maybe like the example you gave of someone working on Wall Street. Maybe they love the money that they're making, but they're like, you know what? I'm gonna go work at the observatory at Mount Lemmon or whatever. I want to go back to astronomy itself, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I have this huge, not let's not be mean, this however much of a pay cut, and that factors in for some people where they have a however lavish of a lifestyle they need to get into.
Yeah.
But if you sit there long enough and think well enough, not necessarily hard enough, about what is important to you, whether it's getting to teach people, getting to be outside, getting to make money, whatever it is, if you pick the things that are most important to you and you say, okay, I need to put these first, then everything else is going to be second, and it'll make your decision making a lot easier.
Yep.
So, as far as like any future plans go for Dr. Kortenkamp, is there anything that you have on the back burner or front burner as far as whether it's more of this 3D media, if there's more in science education you're working on, anything?
Yeah, I think in most of what we do, there are little tiny startup ideas in our head or sometimes on a shelf in some storage room somewhere. And so I have a few of those. One is with these 3D models. I really would like to design and teach a university level class for tactile learners, whether they're visually impaired or someone on the autism spectrum that they just learn better tactilely, or for whatever reason, even if it's just an interest in, 3D printing. I want to learn about these 3D printed, planetary surfaces. So I think that couple years down the road, having a class like that. It couldn't be as big as the classes I teach now. It might maybe have 20 people in it instead of 100 or so that I sometimes get. And then the other one is on the astronomy side of things, I have a really big mirror for a telescope sitting in
Uh,
storage in in my 3D printing room, actually. And I'd like to have a class that together as a class, we build a telescope around this mirror. And it's big, I can kind of hold my arms out, so it would be a big Dobsonian telescope. And together we would build the structure and the optics to turn it from a mirror into a telescope. And I think at the same time, each of us would also be building our own little telescope that we could take with us when we leave. And then, at the end of the semester, we go out on the mall with our telescopes that we built ourselves and kind of show them off in public for people who happen to be walking by. I think that would be a fun class to teach, once a year kind of thing. There'd be some fees involved because we'd have to buy some equipment, but that kind of a hands-on astronomy class would be great.
The telescope is the perfect thing for so many people, like getting attached to astronomy. I know, like when I was in your class, both as a student and a TA, and doing like the telescope projects where we're outside with the 10, 12-inch, whatever telescopes, which for some people, it's like the size of a person, more or less, for the whole tube. And they're not that advanced, but it's enough to where you could see all these little craters of the moon, and you can get up close and you could see like the Terminator or that shadow line really crisp. And I remember so many random people that would just come by because we're just out on the mall, the grass field on the U of A campus, and they'd come over, see it, and it just blows their mind. You see the moon every single day, but you don't see it like this, and it feels more real. You don't oh, yep, it's there every time. It looks the
Yeah,
same, blah, blah, blah. Some people might get disillusioned to it or detached, but you see it in this other real way, not just some picture. It's
that's right.
right there for that light in your eye,
Yeah.
real.
Yep.
That
And
gets
that
people
that's
excited.
the key. Yeah, that's the key. You're not looking at even like a monitor that's hooked up to the telescope doesn't have the same effect as looking through it with your eye and saying, "Holy cow, that's really something." The rings of Saturn is another big one. To
Mm.
see with your own eye is really remarkable. Yeah.
I remember I'm probably gonna remember this kid forever. It was when we were doing this last semester of the telescope project, and there's this little road that goes around the mall for those of you that don't know. And it's this dad and his son on this like juked up four-wheeler sort of thing. They got lights on it, there's probably a speaker, but they're just like zipping on by. And all of a sudden they just stop. Like they see us, they stop, and this kid comes screeching on over, runs over, and he's like, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Can I see?" La 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 la. And we just point telescope. He looks at it and he's oh, and he's just like did not expect any of
Yeah.
that to go down. And he goes flying back to his dad. Dad, it's the moon. You got to see it. And he gets out and they look at it and totally changed what their evening was going to be, I'm sure.
For
Good
me, you
stuff.
can't really beat those kinds of experiences. That's really
That
something.
keeps you going with it. It's just, how
Yeah.
can you not do it? Okay. So turning over to the more classroom setting, specifically getting your perspective more as being a professor, as far as interacting with students for however many years now, since 2007,
Yeah.
2017, whichever, in whatever capacity.
Sure.
Are there trends that you tend to see with students, whether how they interact with material, how excitable they get, whether it's certain things they like, oh, everyone loves the sun every single time, whatever it is. Are there certain things you've noticed be consistent, things that have changed, anything in that vein to talk about?
Yeah, I think so. One of the consistent things is just this hands-on type learning that we do with the telescopes. I know not everybody can do that. It's evening time outside of class, and so we do have a different observational program that we work on where you can do it on your own, but there's no telescope involved. It involves watching the sun over the course of like 10 weeks, taking pictures of where the sun rises and sets. That kind of gathering your own data, whether it's images through a telescope or just images from your phone, I think really has a big impact on people. I have heard, anecdotally, people 10 years ago, they had my class and someone bumps into them. This was someone in Michigan. They work in Michigan now and their husband is a doctor and they happen to be at a social with other doctors. When they heard they were from Tucson, this one doctor said, "Oh, I had a class there once, an astronomy class." It turns out it was my class. And the only thing that they remembered was working with the telescopes. That makes sense. No one remembers the exams they took or how they did on them or something
Yeah.
but they remembered the telescope and the moon and Saturn and so that stuck with them. And I think that has always been there, as the class has evolved over time. So that's one consistent aspect of the class that I teach, the classes that I teach. One of the new trends that we're seeing, and this is a little bit on the dark side now, metaphorically speaking, is the effects of the pandemic in students that are coming to the university now that were like at the end of middle school, the beginning of high school when that hit. And now that wave of students is coming, and that's really throwing many of us you know, throwing us for a loop is the expression that we sometimes say. So in that wave of people, there's still the a large fraction of them that are fully engaged, that really enjoy doing that stuff, and they're doing just fine. But it's no longer like a distribution down to the tail end where there's always a few that, for one reason or another, are just not engaged with the class or with any of their classes. And now it's a much bigger piece. So it's almost like bimodal now. There's this group at the top that are doing just great and really eager and are there every day. And then there's a valley in the middle, and then there's another big group at the bottom of people who are not showing up, sometimes physically not showing up. Sometimes they're there physically, but they're just not engaged at all. And that's a big problem for a lot of us. What do we do? How can we be fair to everyone who's taken the class, over the last 10 years and had to do the same kind of work? How can we be fair to them while at the same time showing some kind of awareness for this new cohort that's coming through and the struggles that many of them are having? And
Yeah.
I have no training in that at all. None of us do, right? And so we're blind to how to handle this. We just try to talk to each other and see if we can figure it out. Um, so
And
sorry to put a dark spin on this, but that's one of the things that the effects of the pandemic in the population of people coming through the university now is a challenge for all of us, for them
that
as well.
And it's an important thing to bring up, in my opinion. Like, it's not a dark spin at all for anyone that might be freaked out. Just like, oh, like if they're like, oh, that was me. I was in high school, whatever, when the pandemic happened. It's not at all like this is not a guillotine of like, oh, you guys are just terrible. Bye bye. Because I
Yeah.
remember when I was a TA this last semester, there'd be a few students that I knew were there in class just about every single day. And then I'd get to their papers or whatever else, and they turn nothing in, or they turn in something that's just come garbage for lack of words, like not even trying a little bit, like they just throw in something. And then you interact with the person and they seem fine. Like they seem like a normal person, like they're just
Yeah.
trying to get through the class, but some kind of disconnect, whether it's they just don't really remember it when they get home or they just lose all desire if it's not right in front of them. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what it is. It's not, I've never felt like some weird animosity towards anyone for not getting it done. It's just is this weird disconnect that everyone kind of feels of like, well, you're not doing the work. Yeah, I'm not doing the work. Why? I don't know. You're like, oh, okay, I don't know either.
Yeah.
So hopefully like education psychology will catch up and be able to tell us what we can do. And the first round of people, by the time we figure it out, everyone's going to be out, in a sense. And hopefully there's not a
Yeah.
round two pandemic to try it out on, but we'll have that knowledge theoretically eventually.
True. Yeah. No, I mean, there'll be studies of these few years in all kinds of different statistical ways. 20 years from now, they'll be looking at, okay, see those weird squiggles in this data from whatever. That's the pandemic and the aftermath of it, as you see it slowly kind of return to, or maybe not return to some kind of a normal situation. But yeah,
And not even just in school, you kind of wonder how much of a impact it'll have like once they graduate and they're going to the 1400 different fields that they're in. Like, are we as a people gonna notice like this dip or this strange air in the workforce or in science
oh,
advancement or any kind of research advancement? You hope not, but you kind of wonder, you
well,
go,
that's kind of scary, right?
yeah,
Like in my mind, I think, okay, well, this is going to be the generation that's teaching the next generation. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of scary if they're going to carry, because usually we teach the way we were taught, right? And so
right.
if that got us through, then that's what we'll do with the next generation. And if that means you don't have to do the work and you'll pass and everything will be okay, that's kind of scary. But then, there's the other side too, in the medical field. Well, this is the person who's going to be running the tests on your blood sample or something. or analyzing the DNA at a crime scene. And so I think that, yeah, in all sorts of different ways, FAA flight controllers, and this could be really weird to see the effects of this going through. I mean, the same kind of thing happened right after World War II, right? There are these kind of ripple effects that carried through, and for generations, they took a while to kind of normalize out, or they took whole classes of people in a different direction. They went to college instead of going off into 9 to 5 type blue collar jobs or something. So it has happened before for a variety of different ways that our society was shaken up. And so it's in some way it's fascinating to think about watching it 30 years from now.
In theory, we do. So one thing I didn't totally catch on at first, for becoming a professor, is there any kind of education schooling that one has to go through as far as like I know a lot of like K through 12, they generally double major, let's say in astronomy and education in order to teach. Is
Yeah.
there any kind of certifications or classes the person has to go through to prove, hey, I can teach at a college level?
No. I mean, those things are available, but none of them are required at this university, right? This is a huge research university, one of the best in the country, in the world in some things. And that's how you get in and then of course you might have to teach. So you get thrown into the classroom with no training in how to teach other than how you were taught, right? And
Right.
so you kind of reflect that back. Same kind of thing with dealing with like mental health issues of students in your class. No training. You have some links that you can share, but unless you actually go out of your way and get some kind of extra certification, you're not required to do it. Now, at some other schools where teaching is the big thing, that might be the case. And I know that, in high schools and lower, that's definitely the case. Even if I were to go apply for a high school science teaching job now, I would need that teaching certificate. I would have to get that first. So that's there at that level, not at all at this level. So I don't know what that means, but it's pretty weird to me to think that.
Yeah, I find it to be halfway infuriating in some ways to not have some like entry I cannot expect someone to go through a full-blown PhD. Like if we just like translate high school to college, be like, well, if you need double degree here, double PhD here. Like, no, do not have people do that. No one would sign up. But
Yeah.
to have a few classes, like some amount of whether it's education psychology
Yeah.
or if it's any kind of just outside of the classroom looking in type of perspective. Some people may not be the most social people. Maybe it's even just as simple as like, here, how can we have conversations with people and
Yeah.
not make it seem like you're the professor who's just way up in the sky and you're talking to the mud people. Like you can
Yeah.
have a conversation to where you're teaching and people still like being taught by you.
No. Yeah. And when you throw into the mix that an awful lot of us in science are very introverted, and then suddenly we're in front of 150 people we have to entertain, some kind of
Yeah.
entertainment, right? And
Hold
so,
their attention and everything and
yeah,
have them take
yeah,
away something. And what do they take away? Well, I don't necessarily have a
yeah.
structure, or maybe I do, but I don't know how to work in that structure. I want to teach this thing. And
Force equals mass times acceleration. That's the takeaway. Yeah.
that's all as long as they get that, I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
going to do for the other 14 weeks, but
No, it'll take you 14 weeks to get that. And that'd be wonderful if that's what we could just focus on, that little tiny thing for the whole time. It's like, what are all the different ways that we can demonstrate force equals mass times acceleration? Car crashes, rocket launches, falling water balloons, things like that.
some people don't remember or know or don't believe that like physics is everywhere. Even if you're going into like astronomy and stuff, you can get like a little bit of any part of science and you can use it every day. Like FEMA, force equals mass times acceleration. You can have that translated to anything. You just go outside and there's something there that's going to be probably moving, or there's some kind of force, and you're like, well, why is it going that fast or accelerated that much for anyone who got irritated by that? Let's not talk about speed, such like that. It exists everywhere, and so it'd be good to have people take away what they can from any class. I'm sure even in my academic advising, if I took like a financial literacy, you'd hope I take anything away from that class on every day, and not just I was there, I checked out, and then I got my credit and left.
Yeah.
So, to make sure I cover the two big things that I give to every single guest, they're not that big in a sense. The first one is basically a question. I'll first preface it. Normally I've been just throwing it out at people, but I think I should preface it a bit. That way it helps maybe change your answer. So let's say I have a bunch of high school or college age students that are listening to this podcast. And they're at the certain point in their life when they're either stuck in a certain track or they're considering doing another. And they're not quite sure if either way they're going to more or less regret it one day.
Yeah.
So for you, I would ask if there is any way you could have a redo, which unfortunately I don't have some time machine I'm going to pull out and be like, hey, here you go, try it out. But let's say in your example, maybe you would have wanted to be a beer driver. You know, maybe after all this is said and done, maybe some reason that just stuck to you and you're like, I wish I would have tried that out for a time. So that if there's a student who's at that same position of, I also am an athlete, I'm variably good at schooling, I only care about this, that, and the other thing, and I'm just going to go into the workforce in whatever way. Oh, you would have done the same thing? Okay, I guess I'll consider doing that too. So, do you have any kind of redo that you would have liked in your life, whether it be that big or even kind of small, of like, yeah, I would have, I never have good examples of this.
Yeah.
Like, I would have just said hi to every single student that came into the class because they liked that, as small as that is. Like, is
Yeah.
there anything big or
Well, I
small?
think that's always a good thing too.
That's
Making
always nice.
making eye contact with people wherever you are, I think it's very important, and that's something I don't see a lot of in science, and even in the halls of my own building, that doesn't happen. And so I try to do that for at least for the younger people. Make eye contact,
Hmm.
smile, say hello. I have no idea who you are or what you're doing here, but I just want you to know that it's a generally a friendly place. But so in terms of like a redo kind of thing, so part of me thinks that you're you're never too old to change paths, right? Because I firmly believe this is the only chance we got, right? And when it's all over, you're done. You're not going to be reincarnated as, another little creature or something. And so that means you're never too old to try to do what you think you want to do. And so these aren't necessarily things that I wish I could go back and do, but I feel like maybe I should find some time to do these now because there won't be a second time around to do it. But one of those is a foreign language. I somehow made it through the system during a time when foreign language was not required. So even though I did take a class or two, I took Russian. I didn't last in it, so I withdrew from the class, but I took Russian for a little bit. I wish I would have stuck with something there. And I know that sometimes it's if you're not totally immersed in it, even if you had several years of it, it's all going to be gone. But I think if I could go back, or if I were to start now, I would try to do a foreign language of some kind. When I went through, computer coding was considered it checked the box for a non-English language, so I learned a bunch of different computer codes. And I don't think
I
that
guess that counts.
qualifies any it counts anymore. Maybe in the School of Engineering, I'm not sure. They somehow they got an exception to that rule at U of A, but and then the other one was more artistic, like a musical instrument of some kind, I think. And my parents used to force us to do that when we were little, and we got to a certain age, then you could stop if you wanted to. And of course, I just
Yes, please.
so something classical like a piano or a guitar, I think would be wonderful to know how to do some little things on. And so I can find motivation from my wife who took guitar lessons at the age of 50. So maybe I should try to do something like that, even if it's just YouTube lessons or something. But those two things, which are a little the other side of the brain kind of thing, foreign language and musical endeavor.
I like that. I think so far you're the first person who has kind of more of the mindset of I don't have to use a redo. I can just do things now. In a sense, like I can add on these things. Like, yes, there's gonna be 1,000 things that get in the way. We'll check back in 5 years, be like, oh, has Dr. Kortenkamp learned the guitar yet? No, it's not.
Yeah,
But have
and
that.
try it out, right? Try it out.
Yeah.
Maybe it is a bit too much for my old brain now. I'm an old dog, and these would be new tricks, and so maybe not. But I wouldn't know unless I put some effort into trying it. So it's kind of like a bucket list, right? It's okay. I got to at least check off the attempt to do that because I won't get another chance when it's all done.
At least being able to make that attempt It's a lot better of a feeling like, well, I wish I learned guitar, and then you can look back and go, well, I tried it for however long, or this many things, or this got in the way, or didn't get in the way, and
Yeah.
you could feel instead of just saying, I just never did. That's it's a lot
Yeah.
easier to regret that. So
Yeah.
good to try.
And maybe my trying will be to try to get my grandkids to do it. It's like, okay,
There you
that's
go.
vicariously through them. Not that I have any grandkids yet, when or if that happens.
The bloodline of Kortenkamp can learn
There we
guitar.
go. Right.
Okay. And then the second thing is I always turn over some time over to the guest and get to use one of my favorite words, unfettered. I'm not going to prompt you in any sort of way besides you can have 10 seconds, 10 minutes, however long to be inspiring, be funny, tell a story you wish you had from my questions but didn't get prompted in any way. If you have anything to say beyond just thanks for coming, goodbye, what would you like to say?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't want to get too philosophical, but I think that for
All layers
for
are
many of
allowed.
us who, yeah, for many of us, we what we're doing now is nothing that we could have imagined, 30 or 40 years ago. It's like, okay, this is totally unreal to be doing. And for me, it's, making these tactile resources for people who can't see so they can study astronomy or even just, experience it a little bit. That would have never crossed my mind. Um, you know, 10 well no since 2007 when I first had that one student, but before then it was like, and now that's such a huge thing of what I'm doing. So it's just pretty weird to be in the moment and then to, like, you're trying to get me to look back to, how what was the path that got me here, chaotic motion.
It's crazy what like I've been enjoying a lot doing this podcast and having be sidetracks related and getting to talk to all these people. I know pretty much every single one of them so far. We're working on getting strangers for me, but even then, you get to find all these little ways that people have navigated around. There's been just about no one who's been just straight shot. They know it exactly. I had one friend who was kind of close. He knew he wanted med school in some kind of way, some kind of doctor, and he is now one. He's an eye doctor. But
Right.
just about every single person has had some kind of existential change, whether it's a complete degree change of music to medicine to astronomy to academic advising or engineering to astronomy or what have you. Every single person at some point, I think I could safely make a guarantee like that, is going to have some kind of hitch, some kind of little blip is going to happen to where you had a plan, you had a hope, you had expectations, and at some point that got all thrown away. Like
Yeah.
even though just a little piece here and there gets tossed out, the plan is going to change, and it doesn't make you any lesser of a person, doesn't make you less valuable. Whatever words you wish to use, it doesn't make you anything. It's just a person. That's what we
Yeah.
do.
In a real way, it makes you normal, right?
Yeah.
And that's a survival sense, right? Okay, this is something that a lot of people, in fact, many people, maybe most people, go through. So in that way, I am normal, and that's comforting to know that. But if you don't have something like what you're providing, or you don't have a group to talk to about that, you may not realize that it's normal, and that can have a big mental impact if you. This is not normal. Why everyone else seems to be on the chosen track, and I'm not. Like, okay, well, actually,
No
everyone
one is.
has. Right, right. So,
That's what I would hope that this podcast and however many other sources out there can help do is just a lot of times it comes down to just conversation or just hearing someone
yeah,
say something, and that could be enough to calm a person or help them think through better and feel just more comfortable in their
yep,
own life and living.
yep. I like to say, get yourself a group, right? It's important to have a group, that you can talk to about various things, and that's a great way to survive. A tribe, a group, whatever, to do that, because it's tough to do on your own. Even if you're an introvert, get a group of introverts. Then, okay,
Even if it's just a little bit of exposure, a little
yeah,
breaking out. You
yeah,
don't need to do every single thing, but
right,
take it down to 90% is you, and then a little bit of help.
yep, yep, yep.
Well, cool deal. Thank you very much, Dr. Kortenkamp, for being on the show today. It's
Oh, you're
a
very
huge
welcome.
pleasure and honor to have you on.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, and I hope I see you around.
And thanks to all you listening. We'll see you again some other time. Have a good one until then. Bye bye for now.
Bye bye.